The JFK assassination, it's a moment that has sparked just an endless debate. Now, we're not going to try and solve the whole thing here, but we are going to dig into two really key pieces of evidence that have fueled conspiracy theories for decades and see why they just didn't hold up under scrutiny.
So, what are we talking about here? First, a ghostly sound on an old police recording that seemed to point to a second shooter. And second, a man holding an umbrella on a perfectly sunny day whose actions looked, well, incredibly suspicious. And believe me, the truth that came out after digging into these two anomalies, it's way more fascinating than any of the theories.
All right, first up, the ghost in the recording. For years, this scratchy piece of audio was held up by a lot of people as the absolute smoking gun of a conspiracy in the JFK assassination. So, this piece of evidence, it comes from a pretty wild source. A 5.5-minute recording from a police motorcycle radio that just happened to be stuck in the on position. It caught all the chaos and radio chatter on Dallas Police Channel 1 right around 12:30 p.m. that day. For a long time, nobody thought much of it. It was just, background noise. That is, until someone decided to listen really closely. Okay, so let's jump ahead to 1978. There's a lot of public distrust in the original Warren Commission report, so Congress puts together the House Select Committee on Assassinations. And they were this close to basically reconfirming the whole lone gunman theory. But then they listened to this tape. And what their experts found, well, it was an absolute bombshell. They came out and said there was a 95% probability that a fourth shot was fired and that it came from the grassy knoll. Now, this wasn't just another theory. This was supposedly the only piece of scientific evidence that pointed to a conspiracy. It was huge. So you're probably wondering, how on earth did they get to that number? Well, it all came down to identifying 4 of what they called impulse patterns on the tape. These are basically sharp spikes in the audio that they believed had the acoustic fingerprint of gunshots echoing through Dealey Plaza, 3 from the book depository and a 4th from the grassy knoll.
95%? That sounds pretty much like a done deal, right? Well, almost right away, this claim got put under a serious scientific microscope. And when other scientists started looking at the very same tape, the official story, it began to fall apart.
And you know where the first big problems showed up? With the officer himself, H.B. McLean, the guy who supposedly made the recording. He was adamant it wasn't his radio. For starters, he's like, the engine noise, that's a 3-wheeler. I was on a 2-wheeler. Even worse, you can't hear any crowd noise on the tape, which is just impossible for that moment in Dealey Plaza. But the biggest red flag? The sirens only kick in 2 minutes after the so-called shots, even though McLean was racing to the hospital with his siren blasting. So McLean's doubts, they basically lit the fuse on this huge scientific battle. It all kicks off in '78 with that explosive claim from the House Committee. Then, by 1980, the FBI is poking holes in their methods, and the whole debate got so heated that the Justice Department had to bring in the big guns to settle it once and for all, the National Academy of Sciences. And in 1982, the National Academy of Sciences came back with their answer, and man, it was a total knockout punch for the conspiracy theory. They concluded that, no, the acoustic data was not reliable and did not support the idea of a second gunman. So what was the fatal flaw? What did they find? Okay, so here it is, the one thing that just blew the whole theory out of the water. By syncing up this dictabelt recording with another Dallas police radio channel, the panel found a broadcast they had in common. This allowed them to pinpoint the exact timing, and the truth was undeniable. The sounds they thought were gunshots were actually recorded a full minute after the assassination had already happened. Okay, so we've talked about what they heard. Now let's talk about what they saw. This is a story of a man who became a legend in conspiracy circles just by doing one simple, very strange thing. Everybody calls him the Umbrella Man. So just picture it. It's a beautiful, bright day in Dallas, not a cloud in the sky. The president's motorcade is coming down the street. And then, out of nowhere, this guy standing in the crowd does something that makes no sense at all. He opens a big black umbrella right as the president is passing by. In that one bizarre moment, a whole new conspiracy theory was born. And just like that, the theories started flying, and they sounded like something right out of a spy thriller. Was the umbrella a signal to the gunman? Go, go, go? Or maybe the umbrella was the weapon, some kind of high-tech device that fired a dart. The truth, as it turns out, was much, much weirder.
Well, the real story finally came out in 1978. Yep, thanks again to that same House committee. They put out a public appeal, and a man from Dallas named Louis Stephen Witt stepped forward and said, I was the umbrella man. So, what was the deal with the umbrella? Witt explained that it was all a protest, but it was this really obscure historical protest. See, the black umbrella was the trademark of Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister back in the 1930s, who was famous for his policy of trying to appease Adolf Hitler, a policy that obviously failed spectacularly. And here's the kicker, the piece that nobody got. Witt wasn't even protesting JFK, he was protesting JFK's father, Joseph P. Kennedy. Before World War II, Joseph Kennedy had been a big supporter of Chamberlain's appeasement policy. So the umbrella was this really specific, historical heckle that was completely lost on everyone there. You know, in his testimony, a pretty regretful Louis Witt kind of summed it all up perfectly. He said, I think if the Guinness Book of World Records had a category for people who are at the wrong place, at the wrong time, doing the wrong thing, I would be number one. He even brought the infamous umbrella with him to the hearing, just this ordinary object that had caused this massive storm of speculation. Okay, so we have these two wild stories, the ghost in the recording and the man with the umbrella. What can we actually learn from all this? What's the takeaway? Well, the takeaways are pretty clear, right? With the dictable tape, it's really a cautionary tale about scientific claims. It shows that just because something sounds official and has a number attached to it, it doesn't mean it's right. You need repeatable, verifiable proof. And then you have the umbrella man, which is a totally different lesson. It's all about how powerful context is. When you're missing that key piece of information, your imagination can run wild and turn a simple protest into a sinister plot. When you put it all together, these two stories are just a perfect lesson in critical thinking. They're a great reminder that you've got to question what you're told, demand real proof, and always look for that missing context before you jump to a big conclusion. And that kind of leaves us with one big question, doesn't it? Why do we seem to love the complicated, tangled story so much more than the simple, even if it's kind of weird, truth? It's definitely something to think about the next time you hear a story that seems just a little too wild to be true.